Today is August 4, 2018, and before we jump into discussion, let's ask our Heavenly Family to help us in our discussion. Heavenly Family, thank you for sending us messages of encouragement and enlightenment and correction. Please help us in the discussion tonight to better understand the foundational principles which lie at the root of all of your messages, and to understand more clearly the principles which constitute the present truth, the present message. Help us to remember the right ways to think and to examine evidence and to conduct discussions in which we are seeking to understand the truth. Please also help us to remember to apply every lesson that we learn to our own lives and to use these lessons as tools of self-examination so that we can correct our ways and to move forward as people who know the truth and who live the truth and can change the world by the truth. Thank you very much. We ask this in the name of Branch, he and she. Amen.
Amen.
So last night we had a question and answer session, and it was a great discussion. I really enjoyed it. We talked about several important principles and questions. And it was really, really good. So tonight we can continue on with the same sort of format. If people have questions on any point of the message, it's a great time to ask. And especially if you have questions that deal with more foundational things or the principles. Not to say that there's not a place for discussing particulars. That's fine. But I think we can all agree that everyone will be benefited more through discussing some of the more crucial issues rather than trivia. So that's why I always try to remind everyone of the fact that, hey, especially if you have something that's on a weightier subject, it's a great time to ask. And also I'll mention that if it's something on more recent topics, then especially it's a great time to ask those sorts of questions as well, while the topics are still relatively fresh in our minds. And I guess we will see where we go from here. So I'll start by asking if anyone has a question that you'd like to ask.
I have a question regarding, sharing. Now, of course, I go to church every Sabbath, and it's known. Part of my beliefs are known, and it's actually being mentioned in the sermons too. But as far as sharing what we know with people or sharing with those, what's the best approach? Because it seems like, obviously the name has a really bad reputation, and talking with people is really difficult. So I'm just wondering.
Sorry that I have to cut in, but there's something that kind of is making you sound a bit muffled. It was okay, and then it kind of increased in terms of a muffled type sound. And then there's also a higher pitch sound also. But anyway, sorry, I just wanted to mention that because at the latter end of what you were saying, I was missing it. I heard you say that, in a church setting and so on, people know kind of what, at least some of what you believe and, but how do you go about sharing? I kind of got that much, but then the end part I missed.
That's actually the basis of it. My little one just hurt herself, so that's why I'm all distracted. But I was just wondering, how to share, or I don't know, because you can't just share from straight from the rod or anything, because nobody wants to hear that. And of course, just being present doesn't really seem to impact people. It just kind of puts them at arms. So I'm just wondering, like, a good way to, I don't know, to start things, conversations, whatever.
Yeah, that's a great question. And first of all, I hope that she's doing okay. Sounds like things are under control and everything. So in regards to your question, this is one of those things that's complex because people are complex and social circumstances are complex. And so it really requires reading the circumstance and knowing the best way to apply within the particular circumstances. So even more importantly than, maybe knowing something to say, and, I'm not saying that you're looking for something specific to say or anything, but the most important thing is to have in mind and to understand the importance of just helping the people, whatever that is. And if that is the primary motive, like more so even than just giving information, but to just help people to be saved from sin, if that is kept as the core of everything, then it will be easier to recognize the right opportunities and to know how to respond within them. And I know it's a really simple thing, but in a sense, it is that simple. And it's just that principle and that motive of love for those around you ultimately serves as a guide. And I'll explain a little bit more of kind of the practical application of that, though, to kind of not just have it lingering there as something that may be a bit more cliche. So let's just say you're in a situation and let's just say it's a regular church service. There's a Sabbath school. People are just, they have their lesson in front of them. They're kind of just barely scratching the surface of the topic. And it's on something that you have something that you might be able to say or to contribute that you learned through the rod message or the branch message or, something that they don't necessarily accept, but you can see that it would surely be of value for them to know it. So if you're in that circumstance, many people kind of leave it at just that. Well, hey, this is true. They should know it. Therefore, I need to tell them. But maybe that isn't actually the right thing in every circumstance, to just tell them whatever it may be that contributes to the subject. Like, let's say they're discussing Jeremiah's prophecy about the new covenant. And it's like, oh man, this has so much more. It has the premillennial kingdom and all this stuff tied right into it. And you might feel like, well, this is the message, so we got to share this. But let's say that the people there already have a prejudice, against hearing anything that you might have to say. Well, at that point, bringing up something new and different to them that they already kind of have a prejudice against and they might be resistant toward, it might not be best to mention that doctrinal point. It might be best to look for, if there's an opportunity where you might be able to say something that no one is going to dispute and that everyone is going to recognize as true and be comfortable even saying that it is true, and to be able to explain that truth better than they themselves could have. What that would do is let them know that, oh, well, this person believes in something that I also believe in, and they actually explain it in a way that is better than I could explain it, and maybe they even explain it in a way that helps me to just settle into it a bit more. If someone is thinking those thoughts about something that you have to say, well, then it really helps to break down some of the prejudice. And that's obviously a positive thing. So that's one circumstance. I'll just give an example of another circumstance for application. Let's say you're in a setting, whether it's Sabbath school or after a church service and people are talking or whatever, and people are discussing something, but they are just repeating things that are really not true, just misconceptions, but they really think that it is true. Well, we know that it's important to correct people so that people don't remain in error, but there's a time and a place for everything, and you might have to read the circumstance, and depending on how people are, and I know that that's kind of vague, it's hard for me to specify much more than that at the present moment, but if you can tell that people aren't going to be happy to receive a correction, then maybe it's just not even the time or place to correct them at all. But if it is, if it's a time where you can see, okay, this is an opportunity and they may actually be able to respond to this, well, then I will try to say something. But instead of just addressing their misconception directly, it may be best to ask them a question that deals with the principle of how to think about things. So rather than looking at the particular issue that they might have wrong, a particular doctrine, let's say, it might be better to start talking to them about how they ended up coming to that belief in the first place. And, doing that isn't so threatening. Rather than you coming to them with something that you feel like you need to explain to them and they should hear it, you can go to them asking them to explain what they believe and why. And then now they are in a position where they are getting to explain something, which people feel good about. And you're in a position where you're listening. And it's so important, I can't stress it enough, to really listen. To really listen and try to understand what they believe and why they believe it. And to never allow ourselves to respond to someone's belief with shock or surprise and kind of the, oh, I can't believe you believe that sort of attitude, No one likes having that sort of response. And obviously, we as Davidians and branches know what that's like. When we explain a belief and someone responds like, oh, I can't believe you believe that, So we have to give people the response that we would want. We have to really listen and take seriously what they believe and why they believe it. And if we see that the belief is wrong, and we also see that their reasons for coming to it are wrong, focus on the reasons. Don't focus on the belief. Focus on the reasons, because chances are the method that they used to come to that one belief, they probably used it to come to another one that may also be false. So it's simply more efficient and less threatening to address the reasons rather than the belief, because people often are unconscious of their reasons. They don't realize the process that they went through. So they don't have an emotional attachment to it. But people do have an emotional attachment to the belief itself. For that reason, it's less of a difficult time for most people in most circumstances to deal with why they believe what they believe and how they got to believe what they believe, rather than trying to show that what they believe is wrong. And if you can see that their reasons for believing it are wrong, then you can, in gentle ways, point that out, whether directly by saying, are you sure that that's really a good way to come to that belief? Or, if you use that same reasoning for this other thing, wouldn't it mean that you would come to some other belief that let's say they know is false. That might be helpful. Or even another thing that's great is if someone believes something that is true, but they believe it for wrong reasons. And then you can kind of show them that, you could say, oh, I believe that too, but for different reasons, and then explain the reasons that you have. And if they see that your reasons are better, that could be helpful to break down barriers yet again. So ultimately, the principles are the most important, and that's what we ought to focus on with people. I know that I just gave 2 hypothetical examples, and ultimately, there are hundreds of other hypothetical examples, and we have to respond to each one according to the circumstances, and different principles will apply in each circumstance. And that's why it's so important to really become acquainted with the principles and to know why you believe what you believe, and to make sure that you have good reasons for what you believe, and that you love the people. I know I mentioned that at the beginning, but I just want to say it again. To really love the people and seek for the best way to help them, which sometimes means saying something, sometimes means not saying anything, sometimes, it just means radically different things in different circumstances. And then the last thing I'll say that's so, so important for anyone in getting to learn how to really kind of strike up conversations with people on the message, or to bring it to them in one way or another, is to do it, to actually start interacting with people and doing it and bringing the principles to that practice. Because so often people become tempted to think, oh, if I just don't have the perfect way to do it, then I'm just not ready, and I'm not even going to talk to anyone about the message at all. But, we'll never get anywhere doing that, because the only way to really become good at sharing the message with someone is to start doing it. That's the only way. If we never do it, we'll never become good at it, and we will never be prepared to do it. So we would put ourselves in a place of demoralization that is as permanent as the mindset that, oh, I just can't do it because I'm not ready. Everyone is able to share the message with someone in some way, at some time, somehow. It doesn't matter how young or old or new to the message we are, or how intelligent we may be, or, even how good at communicating we think that we are or not. It's important to try to share the message, and yes, to try to do it in the best way that we can. And we may make some mistakes along the way, and we ought to be careful to not make mistakes that would be harmful to anyone or would push anyone from the message. But it's important to try. And if someone is just really feeling unable, at least start by talking to fellow believers about the message. And then you can start sharing with people. Most people have someone in their lives that they're relatively comfortable with. You can try talking to that person about it, So the point is to start somewhere and then keep progressing. So I hope that was helpful.
Definitely was. Thank you.
Awesome. And I really appreciate the question, by the way, because it's just really important for everyone. So that said, are there any other questions?
Well, this is Lynn. I was just going to say the question and the answer was very helpful for me as well. I'm sure to many of the others. So I was really glad she asked that. Thank you.
Amen.
Okay, I'm starting to just read just a little, dabbling my toes in a little bit of non-canonical Gospels, which are considered Gnostic by majority of scholars. And I know we just can't follow along and assume they're all Gnostics, as we've concluded, right, with the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Truth, etc. So, and we know we should read them each by their individual merits, etc. But, okay, can you go through a few points of what to look for when you're reading something like that, that will allow you to discern that it's, something that's really not something to read, or that doesn't have truth in it. And I know the principles of making sure, you don't see immateriality in there, like spiritualistic in nature. It's not immoral. It's bringing moral principles. It's got, historical truth to it, etc. But I guess more on the part about distinguishing or discerning the spiritualistic in nature, because a lot of these things, like I should have took a quote, but one of the Gospels was, it says God went from something spiritualistic, and they use the word aeon, A-E-O-N, a lot in these Gospels, right? And something with God leaving his body, going to another body, or there was one quote, Jesus wasn't himself, he was more like a little child, or sorry, he was like a little child instead of being himself. Kind of makes it sound like his body's going from one form to another. So I just, I'm not used to reading these yet, but just wanting to distinguish that.
That's a great question. So, first of all, I'll just mention that there's a couple different issues on the table when reading, quote-unquote, early Christian apocryphal literature. Usually people just think, Gnostic or Orthodox. And really there's Gnostic, there's Orthodox, there's, quote-unquote, Jewish Christian, which is really a modern category, not an ancient category. There's Ebionite, Elkasite, Nazarene, countless other sects of Christianity, some of which had Gnostic leanings, some of which did not. And the question of what type of religious orientation this has is one question. What group it's from is another question. And whether it's true or not is another question. And those questions ought to be kept separate, because ultimately, whether or not a text is Gnostic, its truth value is to be assessed independently. There are texts that are not Gnostic, but are also not true. So I just wanted to mention this just for everyone to keep in mind, to kind of keep our categories straight and that sort of thing. Oh, and the other thing that I'll say as well is that something may be spiritualistic and not Gnostic. Orthodox Christianity was indeed and is indeed very spiritualistic. There's a belief in the immortality of the soul and the conscious existence of the dead. There's a belief in an ever-burning hell, an everlasting immaterial heaven, and an immaterial God. All those things are in orthodoxy, not exclusively in Gnosticism. So that's important to keep in mind as well. In terms of the words that you come across in reading some of the translations of texts which are commonly regarded as Gnostic, it is important to keep in mind that since many of the translators believe these texts to be Gnostic, they translate them in a way that is intended to come across very Gnostic. And so certain terms that scholars believe are kind of technical terms within Gnosticism, rather than translating them, they will transliterate them. Would anyone on the call like to briefly explain the difference between translation and transliteration? Good practice.
I'll try to answer it. I think that translation is taking one word and turning it into a word in a corresponding language that means the same thing, and transliteration would be keeping, how do I explain it? Like phonetically sounding out the word in your language, but not really changing the meaning of it. And I'm trying to think of an example, and of course I can't.
Well, hey, that is a really good explanation, though. That explains it fairly and concisely. And you're right. Translation is about using a roughly equivalent word in another language, whereas transliteration is about the phonetics. So let's just take a word like Elohim. People might think, oh, well, that means God. So that would be a translation of Elohim. I'm not addressing whether it's an accurate translation or not, but most people would say, oh, that's the translation. If you have a transliteration, and let's say you have it written on paper, it will spell out the word Elohim, not in Hebrew characters, because that would just be writing the word Elohim in Hebrew, but in the characters that we use in English or in whatever other language that it's being transliterated into. So, yeah, thank you for that explanation. When it comes to words like aeon and archon and gnosis, these are words that are Greek words which are commonplace in much of Greek literature and in Gnostic texts and in New Testament documents. But in many of the translations of so-called apocryphal early Christian literature, the translators will transliterate these words rather than translate them. And the reason why is because they believe that these texts are Gnostic and that these words meant something very special to Gnostics, and therefore they want to increase the emphasis on those words, and that has an effect of emphasizing the Gnostic character of the text. The problem is using that method is a very different method from translating, let's say, the documents within the New Testament. And if you were to take the documents within the New Testament and use the same method, they would sound very Gnostic to English readers as well. If you have Jesus, instead of saying the rulers of this world, it said the archons of this aeon. It's like, ooh, Gnostic. This is a Gnostic gospel. When really, no, it's just transliteration rather than translation. So it's important to be aware of the translator's techniques. And also, I will say to read multiple translations, because sometimes the translation of one translator can come across very Gnostic or spiritualistic or whatever, and the translation of another translator may not come across as being spiritualistic or Gnostic. But, gnosis just means knowledge. Aeon just means world or age. Age as in like a long period of time in this present age. Archon just means ruler. That's all it means. And if you just translate it rather than transliterate it, it doesn't sound so foreign and Gnostic. That said, it's not to say that none of these texts are Gnostic. There are certainly Gnostic texts, and it's important to recognize texts for what they are. And it's not like you should be looking to find the least spiritualistic reading of every text you come across, because it's not the case that the least spiritualistic reading is always the accurate reading. So you want to try and find, first of all, as accurately as you possibly can, what was the author of the text actually trying to say. And then from that point, you are then able to, or you at least have what you need to judge before you, and then you can begin the process of judging its claims. First, you have to understand its claims, and then you have to go about judging its claims. So again, first, what does this text say? Regardless of whether it's true or false or whatever, just what does it say? What is the point? What's the author or authors trying to get across? And then if you find that really their point is to say that Jesus was a human vessel in which a spirit from a non-physical realm dwelt, and that non-physical spirit then left Jesus and dwelt in someone else, and then left that someone else and dwelt in another body or whatever, if you find that that is really what the text is trying to say, well, then it's just a matter of judging whether or not that is true. And, of course, if it was that particular issue, we would all here hopefully recognize immediately that it cannot be true because the non-physical does not and cannot exist. So we would recognize it as spiritualistic and say this text has shown itself to be spiritualistic. Whether or not it's Gnostic, whatever it may have to say on other things, you can say it's spiritualistic, and that's incorrect. And therefore, I disagree with it to the extent that it promotes spiritualism. And then, if it has any other claims, like it may still contain some degree of historical information, like it may talk about Jesus as a person who actually existed. That's historically accurate. It may mention Pontius Pilate. That's historically accurate. Assess each issue on its own merits. Try to get the message of the author, what was important to them, what they were trying to get across. And that's how you'll be able to assess the overall work. And, of course, asking all the questions that we've been learning to ask, like who wrote this, when was it written, to whom was it written, why was it written, does it claim to be a product of divine inspiration, etc. Aside from that, I'm not sure if there's anything else, like any other aspects that you want me to explain further. So does that answer your question, Anna, or is there a further aspect that you want me to explain?
No, that's good so far. Just another question. Do Gnostic Gospels or writings, okay, let me think how I could phrase this. Okay, you said read other translations, right? So not all scholars believe something is Gnostic. So would I find other scholars translating it in a non-Gnostic way?
Yeah, that's certainly a possibility. Not all scholars think that every text in the Nag Hammadi library is a Gnostic text. Many scholars do. It's been the assumption since the beginning of Nag Hammadi studies, because the initial scholars who worked on the Nag Hammadi text took them to be Gnostic texts. And so that became the general position and what most scholars were taught in university when they had their initial exposure to these topics. And unless a scholar then went to specialize in Nag Hammadi studies, they most likely, many scholars just end up repeating what they learned, thinking that it's most likely correct. But there are scholars who have definitely gone and specialized more in Nag Hammadi studies and thus they have more opportunity to question the assumptions of those who came before them, or at least they have put themselves in a position where they are more likely to be thinking about these questions and thus to challenge the assumptions that many scholars have. And there's quite a number of scholars who recognize that, yeah, there's plenty of texts in the Nag Hammadi collection that are not Gnostic in character, and some of these scholars have translated one text or another. There's translations of these texts aside from just a translation that you can find of the entire library. You can find like the Nag Hammadi scriptures or the Nag Hammadi library, which is, those are both translations of the entire library. But you can also find a translation just of the Gospel of Truth, let's say, or just of the Apocryphon of James or whatever. And oftentimes the translations that are just of a single book are just done by one translator or one scholar. And sometimes you might be able to read an introduction to their book or whatever, and you can find out if they think that the text is Gnostic or not. The important thing is, whatever translation you're reading, try to get an idea of how the translator understood the text. Do they think that this is a Gnostic text, or do they not think that it is a Gnostic text? What is their method of translation? Those are good questions to ask, and basically for any scholarly translation, there will be an introduction in which they explain their perspectives. So it should be easy enough to find out. If you can find the translation, you should be able to find their introduction to it and thus discover their perspectives and what assumptions they may be bringing to the process of translation, and that can always be helpful to know.
Okay, good. Excellent. Thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
We're listening to your answer, and I enjoy the answer that you gave her, and in listening to your answer for the last question and the previous one. We sit here as parents to 3 children, and we work, and my wife is, busier than I as a homeschooling mother, and we're thinking about the, translations and different things, and pretty much everything that you just spoke about, and it becomes a little overwhelming, especially, coming from our past beliefs and then moving some of the branch understanding of things, and then realizing that you're, 4 messengers behind, and then we're talking about going into different, ideas of Gnosticism and spiritualism, and finding out what the prophet spoke and what he meant, and getting his idea. And I'm just here thinking, this sounds like a collegiate doctorate degree of information. And although I know that we need to be versed and give an answer to every man, it's overwhelming. It feels overwhelming. And, just in relation to the question of Sister Annalise mentioned about it, as far as the books she canonized and those outside, to have to look into all those things. And I'm sure it's not uncommon feeling that we're trying to express here. But, if there was a list of books outside the canon that you all have studied out and see that are that you believe are inspired, I would love to maybe start there to investigate those books, as opposed to just kind of randomly shoot for something and have to start reading through a list of the first and second pseudepigrapha by Charles, I think is it James Worth or Charlesworth, James Charlesworth. Is there a list that you guys have kind of put together that you feel in your heart that you believe is inspired, that we can kind of start on that list and and start using the principles of truth and righteousness and studying to maybe prove those things first. And I guess we just kind of look at each other and go, wow, where do we have time?
We're
That's pretty
behind.
much it. Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, I totally get your question, and I appreciate the experience, and I think we can all tend at times to, have the feeling of being overwhelmed. And, Teresa and I can certainly relate to that when there's just a huge amount of work and there's books to write, videos to produce, questions to respond to, buildings to put up, there's just a ton to do. And to do one thing is to neglect 10 others. And there's just way too much for any one person to handle. In reality, though, we have to remember that there's only 24 hours in a day. Yes, we need to make the best use of the time that we have. But it is not possible to do everything or learn everything. And it never will be possible, because once we are in the world to come, so to speak, we will be opened up to much, much, much more of reality that right now we are totally ignorant of. And we will always know but a fraction of what is to be known. And we will always only be able to accomplish but a fraction of what there is to accomplish. And that will be the case forever and ever and ever through all of eternity. And we need to learn to enjoy that. And here's the thing. While it is important, as I'm sure you guys know, it is important to get to know all of this stuff. And, we spend lots of time on it because it's so important and because it helps us to learn what really is, and it helps us to have our misconceptions cleared up. However, more important than any of those things is to come to know the principles. It's to be thinking in the right way. So the way of thinking is way more important than knowing all the things to know. And yes, if we're thinking in the right way, we will strive to know more and more. But it's not about knowing more and more and more in and of itself. It's about having our way of thinking refined and educated so that we can really know how to learn and unlearn in the right way and know how to help people to learn and unlearn as effectively as possible. That's most important. And so for everyone, for you, Todd, and Jennifer, and everyone else here, don't feel so overwhelmed about trying to know everything. Yes, study the message, absolutely, but have as your primary focus to understand the principles and to know how to go about determining what's true and what's not true.
And isn't that part of what he's asking? Like, which books are there certain books outside of what they're familiar with that have already been determined to be products of inspiration that they could be pointed to look to for instructions in righteousness and that sort of thing? Unless I misheard, was that part of the question?
Yes, that was, Teresa. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's what I understood too. I just haven't got to that aspect of it yet. But so in regards to that, though, I'll mention that there's not a list that we have of books that have been tested and the conclusions been drawn on those books. And actually, we don't think it would be the greatest idea to make such a list for the simple fact that people in today's world tend toward having a canon. And when you have a canon, you end up reading these writings as the Bible or as scripture or as part of a canon. And that often convolutes the meaning of the text. And once we get into thinking according to a canon, we really stop asking certain questions that we need to keep asking. So we won't put out a list or anything like that, but I will mention a couple writings that I think are highly important. And I'm not even going to tell people like, this is something that you should, we've already determined this to be inspired or to determine it to be from God or something like that. And therefore, if you're going to be a part of this, you need to believe that this is part of the inspired scripture or something like that. No, because even if something is inspired, someone shouldn't accept it as inspired because someone else said that it's part of the list or it's scripture or whatever, or we've tested it and known it to be so. Each person needs to test it for themselves. But there are certain writings that are highly, highly valuable to read. At least that's the claim that I'm making right now, that I would really recommend for everyone to read. And I'll just mention two writings right now. One of them is in the Old Testament Pseudepigrapha, Volume 2, edited by James Charlesworth. And so if you have that 2-volume set, then you have this. In Volume 2, there's a collection of poetic writings called the Odes of Solomon. And they weren't written by Solomon. They don't claim to be written by Solomon. Tradition gave that title to them, but they're highly important. And we have studies on YouTube explaining some things about them and going through certain specific odes. And those odes have been very important in this message. And some of the content of this message derives from the Odes of Solomon. So that's something definitely that's worth someone's time to study. And then the other thing that I'll mention is a text called the Apocryphon of James. That is not in the Old Testament Pseudepigrapha. It's not in the Standard Apocrypha or anything like that. Really, the best way to find it is in a translation of the Nag Hammadi library, otherwise known as the Nag Hammadi Scriptures, or you can just find it on the internet by typing in the Apocryphon of James, not to be confused with the Apocalypse of James. It's the Apocryphon with an N at the end, Apocryphon of James, and we highly recommend for everyone to study that over and over and over again. That's one of the texts that is worth reading time and time again, and a lot of what it says is very relevant for the experience of the branches today. And we also have some videos on YouTube going through that. And within the YouTube channel, you'll see not the bar at the very top center, but there will be another little section inside the YouTube channel where you can do a search, and you can type in a search phrase there, and it will search just the videos on the YouTube channel. And so you can search the Odes of Solomon or the Apocryphon of James and come across all of our studies on those topics. And then the other thing is at the top, there's all these tabs. You have videos and playlists and about and things like that. If you click playlists, our channel is actually pretty well organized. You can go through it and look at each playlist, and things are categorized. So it's easy to find studies on the Odes of Solomon, or if you go to New Testament Apocrypha or something like that, you can find the Apocryphon of James along with other texts. So, yeah, I recommend for everyone to look on the YouTube channel to find those studies that we have. But, if I was to recommend 2 texts for you guys to really look at, those would be the 2, the Odes of Solomon and the Apocryphon of James.
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
Trent must have introduced, these kind of things, Gnosticism, pseudepigraphas, 2 years and more, right, ago. And, I think I could speak on behalf of most people. It is overwhelming, very overwhelming, right, when you're not used to this. And, I'm just now asking this little bit of question tonight, and just because I just happened to stumble across a topic that that piqued my curiosity, and I ended up in these Gnostic Gospels. And so just to let you know, we feel your pain, and it's overwhelming. But if you press on, you endure, keep steady, stick around, you actually get used to it, and you end up being familiar with these terms, and it becomes, familiar eventually. Pseudepigrapha, Gnosticism, like these are all terms that just were totally out of my brain back then. But, I was determined, it's like, okay, I know I'm getting old and everything, but life doesn't end, right? So you just keep up with it. And I guarantee our Heavenly Family will lead you in the right path. And we've got Sister Wisdom, and she's there for us. So anyway, that's it.
Well, thank you for the encouragement, sister, and thank you for the answer, Trent.
Yeah, amen. The other thing that I'll add, building on what Anna said, a couple times she said, if you just keep up with it and that sort of thing, it becomes, you get used to it and easier to kind of deal with, oh, here's another new thing that I didn't know about. That kind of reminded me of another aspect of this, and that is, if you have all these things, like you mentioned, like, oh man, you have, like however many prophets behind, and it's like, okay, so, Ellen White wrote a whole bunch in and of herself, and then Victor Houteff wrote a lot too, and then come to find out you have Ben Roden and Lois Roden and Doug Mitchell, and it's like, okay, there's just a lot to read, and then the whole canon thing on top of it, there's just a lot more to read. And, how exactly do you deal with that? Well, let's remember, just Ellen White's writings alone are more to read than almost anyone can do in a lifetime. But any Davidian knows that shouldn't stop us from hearing the Rod message. A lot of people say, well, I haven't even finished reading Ellen White's writings yet, so how can I study the Rod? Well, we know that really it's the principle that Ellen White advocated that we really needed to learn, and we still need to learn many more principles that she advocated. And yes, we need to continue to read her writings, but rather than just like, okay, I need to finish all this, it's, I need to live by the principle, and the principle that she advocated is to be willing to hear the reasons the messenger may give and, prove all things and hold fast to that which is good, and to advance with truth as it progresses. And just so if a Davidian is reading Victor Houteff's message and accepts it, and, they know that it's true, and they haven't read all of it yet, and then they come across Ben Roden's message, well, they know that they need to investigate it. And if they can determine that it's true, they should accept it and move forward, even if they haven't read all of Victor Houteff's stuff yet. And so one of the things that's so important to keep in mind is that it is present truth that the flock needs now. And if, there's a whole bunch of stuff to read and you are having trouble choosing because, where do you start? Well, make sure to keep up with present truth as it progresses, because it's what we need now, and it's the thing that will help us to get a grasp of everything else and to catch up the fastest. And, just like every Davidian knows that if the devil can keep someone from the rod message, like let's say in Victor Hodoff's day, the rod message, it was really present truth when Victor Hodoff was alive. Someone might come to accept Ellen White's writings, become an Adventist, and hey, but so long as you can keep them from present truth, then that's okay. Just so today, like if you get Ben Rodin's message, or if you get Lois Rodin's message, and like you really dive into it and you get it, that's great. Like that's good to get. But if it's at the expense of present truth, then it's a losing game anyway. Like we need to understand present truth. Now, that said, what I'm saying right now applies differently to different people depending on where they are at. Like if someone is at the point where they're really just testing these messages and they don't know if it's true, they don't know if it's present truth, well, then it doesn't make sense to necessarily have the primary focus on what is claimed to be present truth. Like when I first studied the branch, I knew that if Ben Rodin didn't have a true message, then anything that built on his message isn't true as well. It's like a family tree. If the root is bad, the tree is going to be bad. So, okay, I have to check out Ben Rodin's message just to see if any of the rest of it is even eligible. It was only after I was able to determine, oh yes, this is actually true, and was able to establish the line of truth, then I was able to say, okay, now that I know that these messages are true, I need to make sure not to miss out on present truth as it's being revealed. And so that's really what I'm getting at is, hey, if there are things that anyone needs to test, yes, go test those things. If you come to the point for anyone of being able to see, yes, this is the line of truth, make sure to keep up with present truth. Even if that means that it slows you down in reading all of Ben Rodin's stuff or Lois Rodin's stuff, it's okay. Still read the stuff, but allow yourself to be slowed down in order to keep up with present truth as it goes on. And that may point you in the direction of other things. Like sometimes as we're studying something in the present message, we will reference something from past messengers or recommend for people to read a certain thing or whatever. And then you'll be able to read it with more understanding and bring what you read there to the understanding of present truth as well. So that's kind of just another thing that hopefully will give a bit more focus and reduce the feeling of being overwhelmed, because it helps you to know kind of where to start.
Yeah, Trent, that's what I like to tell people, right? When people feel overwhelmed, or they'll say, like, where do I start? Or, there's so much to read, etc. I always quote that the present truth is what the flock needs now, because how I like to say it is, it's actually going to help you avoid unnecessary reading of things that, maybe it's not relevant at this time. It points you to relevant topics. It points you to relevant sources, right? And it's just things that you need now that's relevant. And if it points you back to other writings from the past, it does. And it's because it just needs to be read, right? So it avoids you having to unlearn unnecessary things. It just gives you what you need now.
Yeah, indeed. And let's face it also that this message in particular, it's just so focused on principles and like the foundational things that really in learning present truth, it teaches you how to learn most effectively and to acquire knowledge most accurately and to really be able to get a grasp for what truth is and how to acquaint yourself with it. And it deals with such fundamental things like materialism and canon and all of those things, like basic assumptions and questions. And so, yeah, you know, the whole thing of present truth is what the flock needs now applies at any time with any message when it is present truth. But it is especially the case in this message that coming to understand present truth will help you to understand everything else. Because again, some of the things that people stumble over the most are like, oh, the nature of inspiration. Man, people stumble over that big time, and it can be really a difficult subject to get through. And if you're stumbling through Ellen White and Victor Hoddle and Ben and Lois without understanding the principles of how inspiration works, it's going to be a lot of hard work to really understand it, and it can be a painful experience. But man, I mean, we have these 6 studies on YouTube going through the nature of inspiration. It's just a few studies, and it really deals with the subject so well. And if someone goes through that and gains an understanding of those principles, well, then they won't be struggling so much in coming across issues where inspiration is relevant when reading the writings of past messengers. That's just an example, maybe even the best example of how understanding this message really does help and make it easier to get all the past stuff. So we have been on for over an hour now, and we should probably bring an end to the meeting. If anyone else has something that they feel really impressed to say still within this meeting, and if you feel like you can keep it relatively brief, feel free to say so. And if not, if someone would like to thank our Heavenly Family and we'll bring an end to the meeting, then that would be great too.
Hello. Heavenly Family, I thank you for the principles, actually, that we learned tonight, that I learned tonight about present truth and the importance of it and the timeliness of just using our time in the wisest way possible. And I just thank you for all the questions tonight. And I thank you, Sister, for each one on the call. I pray your hand of blessing upon all of us, and just help us to be patient and diligent and just willing to stick with you, Sister. And thank you for sticking with us. In the name of the brother, Amen.
Amen. Amen. All right. Love you all. Shalom.
Shalom.